Hello and welcome back to Braver New Worlds, a podcast about the stories we need to tell for the future we want to see. My name is Nathan Young. I am your host. And one of the questions I've been thinking about a lot lately is trust. Like, how do we decide who or what to trust? And if you're looking around in our world, you can kind of see that this seems to be a question that's going on right now, right? This comes up all the time when it comes to politics, news media, science, medicine, technology, or even like the people in our lives. A lot of the institutions that we leaned on for trust, they aren't showing up the same ways, or we just aren't trusting them the same ways. And so we're sort of left trying to figure this out. Again, all on our own. And one of the places where I think, this question of trust is so important and so valuable, and the implications of it are really going to bite us in this way that's going to be very sort of slow and unseen, is in the world of like science and medicine. And I get why people are skeptical of science, medicine, pharmaceuticals, but also like so much of the quality of life that we enjoy right now is built off of the innovations and technologies and what's been built in that realm of understanding and learning. I really think it's important for people and institutions in these realms of science, technology, and medicine to really be able to communicate to us as a wider population about what they're doing and actively create and foster some trust. So my guest today is Lola Akapo. She's the founder of Benchtop to Boardroom, where she helps biotech organizations communicate the impact of their work more clearly to investors, regulators, advocacy groups, and the public. And she spent nearly a decade working inside biotech, specifically with the mRNA vaccines and biologics programs. And that's, as we've seen, that's a place where trust in science and medicine is currently being very hotly debated. And as you listen to this episode, kind of at first glance, it might sound very much like a conversation about drug development and the future of biotechnology and how this process goes vis-a-vis capitalism and investment. But underneath it, there's also like just very much a conversation about trust and communicating from the science down to the people, all of us, right? And it brings up this question that like maybe some of the most important innovations in the world succeed or fail based on whether people trust and understand them. Because scientific innovations often do move faster than public understanding. A lot of times things come up and there is some inherent skepticism in the science that's happening. Without making a judgment call, we've got all these questions about AI. We've got all these questions about like mRNA vaccines. And it's right for us to be skeptical and want to know what these things are. There are some bad actors in science and technology that are causing part of the problems, but there's a lot of value that can be got there too. So how do we get the good actors to really be able to communicate the value of the work they're doing to the rest of us so we can have faith and trust in them? And so part of the conversation we have is we really get into the role of the larger community of trust building around medicine, specifically with regards to patient advocacy groups, the FDA, scientific literacy, understanding risk, uncertainty, and whether society maybe needs more translators who can help us bridge the gaps between the experts and everyone else, or if it really is up to like the scientists and the biotech organizations to tell the story and communicate the value and build those relationships too. So even if you're not particularly interested in biotech, I think you'll find this conversation important because underneath it, we're really talking about trust and how that is done specifically in a field where there's some built-in skepticism. And so with that, here's my conversation with Lola Akapo. Lola, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Before we get started, I'd just like to have you introduce yourselves to the audience here real quick, just so they can know a little bit about you before we get talking.
Yeah, so my name is Lola Akapo. I've worked in CMC for just under a decade now, specializing in biologics and specifically mRNA therapeutics. And I am the founder of Benchtop to Boardroom, which is my consultant agency that tries to help smaller biotechs or those that just need a little bit of help really communicate the impact of their science in a way that is going to reflect upon their larger audiences. So we're not just talking about a peer-to-peer conversation, we're talking about conversations with board members, investors, regulators, anybody who also wants to have a stake in the public health conversation.
Okay. So it sounds like communicating science to, a broader, more mainstream world, especially specifically biotech science, but all science too, right?
Correct. My particular background tends to be in biologics, so that's what I know best, but this is a conversation that can and should be applied to basically all drug development. People really want to know what you're doing. They care about it. It affects all of us, and inviting them as part of that conversation has multiplier effects for truly everyone.
Yeah. Okay. And so before we get started too, so you said a couple things there where I was like, wait, what's that? So I heard CMC and I heard Benchtop for a non-science audience. What do these mean?
So CMC is chemistry manufacturing controls, and that's
Okay.
the part of the company that owns the actual product. It tends to be incredibly technically based. So it deals with how it's made, how it's tested, how it scales, and how it holds up under regulatory and inspection scrutiny. Benchtop there is doing multiple jobs. For one, it's the name of my company, Benchtop to Boardroom, and it's supposed to reflect this mission where you're really reflecting not just the technical aspects of what you're doing on a bench level, the people who are there mixing solutions together and like running them over instruments, but you're also reflecting that outwards into rooms where you're not quite as intimately well acquainted with it. So whether it's boardrooms or it's just outside rooms of people in public or regulatory agencies, whoever you may be, the wider audience there is what we're trying to connect those two avenues.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And so let's see, because part of what we're talking about here too is, and this is something that surprised me when we talked on the phone a while ago, was that even within the world of science, scientific literacy could use some help, right?
Yeah.
So
I would agree with that.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I would say that, so to explain it in terms of drug development, the way that it typically goes is that you start with an idea. This is the foundational science. I have a molecule that I think might work for this disease area. From there, you do all of your testing, and this can take a decade is generally the time that they have for that. So from the research phase to the manufacturing phase to the clinical phase. And at that point, you're talking to regulatory agencies, specifically the FDA, and you're asking them, we have this product that we think is safe and effective for public health in this disease state in this population. Do you agree that we've done enough testing that it is safe and effective? And then from there, you're asking for market approval. Can we then sell it to the public?
Yeah.
Typically, this is at the point where companies do a lot of effort into commercializing. And a part of that, you have all those business development activities, such as writing advertisements, explaining it to people. This is what it does. This is how it's supposed to help you. This is how you make feel on it. It's my position that it's a great leverage to use to introduce your company, your mission, and your product to the wider audience. That's true. The force multiplier that you're looking for here is better served earlier. And we've seen companies that have done that really well, and they're able to take advantage of not just bringing people on the end stage, but really making them full partners along your journey. So it's my work here to lead founders and biotechs and the public in general along this drug development pathway at the stage that is a decade prior to commercial availability.
Yeah.
So at that little research stage, what does it look like to bring people on and have them become partners in your success as a development agency?
Okay. And so I'm going to ask you to paint the picture here a little bit more too, of like who are we talking about bringing on and communicating to, and like what does it look like to bring them in earlier?
Yeah, so this is the part where we talk about it a lot when it's gone wrong, and I'm talking about building it as part of your model so you never reach that point. And we call this like trust, building a trust infrastructure as part of your development operations. So the companies that do this really well are able to use it to de-risk their platforms, to accelerate their innovation. And when they don't do it that well, you hear about it in the news. So what we're talking about here is bringing on your teams internally, making sure that each of these individual segments that work together over that decade of drug development to build this product understand on an impact level what they're doing and why it matters, and then reaching out to your external audiences. And by then, we're counting the regulators, so the FDA, we're counting your investors, we're counting the public, we're counting all of these people and saying, like, they are also impacted by the work that you do. They can also be aligned on this mission. And one of the key levers here are patient advocacy groups. They do really strong work in creating pressure on policy and innovation and making sure that it gets the funding that it needs, that it's getting the spotlight that it needs. And when you bring them on as partners, you are able as a drug development company to also benefit in the work that they do. So an adage I'd like to say a lot is that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. As part of this trust infrastructure, what you're doing is you're opening their doors and you're bringing them on and you're saying, hey, we are building something here. We want to become partners with you against this disease that we're trying to impact. Let us create some trust together by creating transparency and using that to drive innovation. I think the key part here is that you as a company cannot promote on products that are not approved yet. That is illegal and you're not allowed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So the key is to really build this trust around not individual products, but the disease state itself. And that is something that you can do early in the process.
Okay. So I want to try and like rephrase a little bit of what I'm hearing from my like non-science mind and kind of like zoom out, because like I am not a scientist, but I've always been a fan of science and like intrigued by science. And so like I kind of, and I understand a lot of the processes that go into, bringing a drug to market and how it's like a 10-year process. And there is a lot of like regulation and a lot of testing that goes on. And, my father worked in pharmaceuticals also. So I sort of like know a little bit about it just tangentially from that. And I guess, so kind of what I'm hearing you say is, on the one hand, it's almost sort of like a mission-driven culture shift within biotech and pharmaceutical organizations to, rather than think about like, we have this one molecule or this product that could potentially do these things, to like, think of like, we are working towards some sort of solution to a medical problem or a problem that can be solved through biotech, chemicals, molecules, whatever that is. Is that, I don't know, am I kind of getting it or?
No, that's exactly right. It's this idea that biotech is such a huge hurdle.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of passionate people to get to the point where you're at a product. And that is already mission driven.
Yeah.
I know because I've been on the bench level. I know that the scientists care about the mice that they're going to inject preclinical work in. This is not even something that's going to go into humans yet. You're literally working at your bench phase, mixing things together personally, and you're saying, this is going to go in a mouse model. I don't want to hurt the mice. And so these are people that really do care about what they're doing, but there are some companies that do this in a more transparent basis and they bring in partners early, and there's some companies that delay it. And that's really where the edge is. So for example, what it looks like when you do partnership well is cancer. Cancer patient advocacy groups are incredibly powerful partners when it comes to bringing innovation in that space. And they've been doing this for decades. So this is not anything that's new to drug development, and it's not anything new when it comes to the benefit that can be seen from this. Know that there is a lot of funding from the NIH, from the federal level, in terms of making sure that there's enough spotlight and enough resources and enough education around what you're doing, why it matters, who is affected. And we've seen that become real gains for biotech companies in general. So for example, in 1971, I think there was the National Cancer Act that was signed. And that really cemented federally that we're going to put a lot of effort into making sure that we're going to take on cancer and we're going to try to eradicate it if possible. From there, we got a lot of patient advocacy groups. They're not the first ones that ever showed up, but because there was this spotlight on cancer as a therapeutic area, it garnered more interest and more partners in that space as well. One of them I want to really highlight is the Friends of Cancer Research, because they ended up doing a lot of policy work that led to the breakthrough therapy designation in 2012. This was huge when it comes to drug development, because it brought in drug developers, the FDA, and patient advocacy groups all together in a coalition. And it said, hey, if you show that a drug that you're working on is safe and efficacious, even at this early levels, you're not going through the full clinical trial stages, we are willing to work with you, give you more meetings with the FDA. We're willing to accelerate your timelines because you've shown that there's real need in this space where there wasn't before. You're serving an underserved market. Now, this helps patients, obviously, because they're the underserved market. They're the ones who need these drugs. This also helps drug developers. We mentioned that it's like a 10-ish, sometimes 15-year-ish timeline. Taking time off that is time on market. Exactly. It's a huge investment return. Plus, you've called the FDA in as partners to your problem. They're not gatekeepers anymore. They're in negotiation with you. They want to help you succeed. This happened because they brought in these partners at early stages. And this is infrastructure that has been building since the 40s. It's a long turnaround time, but the benefits you gain from it are felt wide reaching and everywhere.
So and it seems like part of the shift that can happen here is that, you can have a little bit more, like when you're going to start making that 10, 15-year investment towards developing a new drug, you can have a little bit more of assurance that there will be a receptive market for it at the end of that,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, because we're not asking for drug developers to be altruistic. It's a for-profit business model, and we're very aware of that. But we are saying that if you're bringing in these partners early, it's helping you de-risk your platforms. The amount of drugs that actually make it from that research phase to commercialization, I think it's like less than 10%.
Yeah.
If you can de-risk that platform, you're helping yourself by bringing other people along with you. If you want to go far, you have to go together.
So why aren't they just doing this then?
They are on a sometimes basis.
Right.
On a sometimes basis. I would say that cancer is one of those that they've done it really, really well. Like they've been going on since the 40s. HIV is another one that has a really well public-facing arm that works in coalition with these drug developers to get the word out and to, smooth out that pathway. And then there are some pathways that are not utilizing this quite as well. And there are some pathways that are just new. So one of the ones I mentioned was mRNA. That's a particular love of mine. It's new.
There was some stuff there was some concern about that out in the world, out in the news. Yes.
Yeah. The timeline that you've had to build that infrastructure wasn't the best. And they did it in response to a crisis. So the impact language that they needed to communicate was already communicated for them. People felt it personally in their households. It was on the news. We saw it in our communities. No one needed to convince you how real COVID was.
Yeah.
And so like that, itself created pressure on regulatory agencies and drug developers to really move with speed and conviction to make that vaccine. But because it happened so fast, the trust infrastructure that needed to be built and the time needed to build that was compressed in a way that was lacking. I'm not saying that, it's completely lost. It's something that builds over time. And we do see more wins coming from Moderna specifically, who are really well working with HIV specifically to build, mRNA vaccines for HIV. So it is possible. And that's really what separates, I think, the really top performers in these new spaces, because they are working with these groups to do that education portion. And if you're leaving that till later, then you're not really giving yourself the best foot forward.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's interesting. And I guess like when you think about like HIV and cancer on one hand, and then like the mRNA COVID vaccine on the other hand, like those are sort of two extreme examples, right? Of like we've been talking about cancer and HIV for decades and working on towards cures for that. And there have been like public outcries for cures for that for a long, long time. That's like a cure for cancer. Like people just say, that's sort of like a catchphrase. Whereas, COVID, nobody heard about it. Then all of a sudden, it didn't exist prior to 2020. Then all of a sudden it's here and we're dealing with it. We're trying to figure out. And there's obviously going to be a sort of lag in people's adjustment to taking on, even recognizing that COVID's a thing, right? Because people, there's still people out there that just don't even believe that COVID was real or something, right?
Right. That's real.
Yeah. And so then adjusting to this like new technology, there's always going to be a little bit of a lag, and that lag can show up as skepticism or even like conspiracy, right? Whereas it's interesting that like you don't hear the same level of conspiracism around cancer. Maybe it's out there, you just don't hear it. But like
it just happened earlier. I would say that cancer, the war on cancer really took place in the 40s and 50s. So we're just behind the ball on that, and we're gaining the fruits of everything that's been built. The AIDS crisis happened in the 80s. That itself also had its own level of skepticism and its ramp up to being publicly accepted. And we're just behind that line now. mRNA as a modality, because it's not a disease state, it's a tool to be used to access these other disease states. It's just happening right now, which is why it feels so prescient in our minds and why it feels so new, which is why if you're in a biotech company in that stage looking at this new modality, it's going to be really important for you to start reaching out to these partnerships and build that trust, because that helps everybody. It's going to be what decides whether or not a new vaccine or a therapeutic or a cancer therapy or whatever it is, because RNA can be applied to multiple different areas, is going to have that kind of soft landing that you're looking for, or at least a negotiation with the FDA and with the public. It's kind of just the process of introducing new ideas to people who've never heard of it before.
Yeah, totally. Well, it does create a lot more acceptance of these new products as they hit the market too, which is like good for them, their bottom line, right? They're going to sell more.
Like I said, no one's asking these drug developers to be altruistic. We're saying that if you really put the effort into making your story early, it helps you out, because then your individual team. So one other thing that we talked about earlier is that in a biotech company itself, you have multiple different departments, right? and you do see that in every company. This is not brand new to people, but you have departments that are CMC, so they do the technology and the manufacturing. You have departments that are for regulatory, that are for specifically talking with the FDA and making sure you're in compliance. You have departments for business development, departments for strategic alliances, for commercializing. All of them have different focuses, right? And they all need to work together towards one mission to get one product out the door. They need to speak to each other in the same language.
Yeah.
They all need to speak to each other in the same language. And this is the same language that I am saying is going to directly reflect on how you reach out to these patient advocacy groups, to regulators, to your investors, to your board, because you're all talking the language of impact. What does it mean? You can create this technology that is super foundational and makes you cutting edge operationally amongst all your competitors. But you have to make people care about it.
Yeah.
And how you're doing that has to be aligned internally, which is the part that I kind of do. You have to do that externally through partnerships, and you have to make sure that you're showing up authentically, which means you all have to be mission aligned across that entire segue. That's not easy to do. But if you can do it, you can get big wins.
Yeah. As much as I love doing this podcast, sad truth of it all is that doesn't pay the bills. It actually costs me money to make this podcast. But that's okay. I love doing it, so we're doing it. What does pay the bills for me is I help individuals and organizations leverage the power of storytelling for leadership and persuasion. This is the work I do, and I want to tell you about it real quick here. For organizations, a lot of times the work is very much focused on fundraising for nonprofits or developing a narrative strategy for the important messages that they want to get out in their campaigns. It can also be about developing leadership and communication skills amongst the team that you've already got working within your organization. For individuals, a lot of my work revolves around helping develop a narrative-based communication approach for those high-leverage career moments that come up from time to time, like giving a public talk, interviewing for a new position, integrating into a new role at a new company, or making the leap for yourself to jump into entrepreneurship and how you talk about the work that you do with the external audiences there too. These are very much the moments that can have a huge impact on your career. And by utilizing storytelling and narrative, you can not only communicate a more resonant message about what it is that you're doing, but also one that's going to stick. So if this is intriguing to you and you want to know more, you can check out my website, storycultureconsulting.com. I'll have a free tool on there that's available for download, or you can check out the show notes too. I'll have the same tool down there that you can grab too. Once again, that's storycultureconsulting.com. And now back to the show. That's so interesting. So, because I think I'm sure with you too, like part of my work in the past has been helping scientists communicate their work in a more, standard language. And a lot of it's involved storytelling and being able to like communicate the value of their work outside of just, the bench where they're working on it, or just to other scientists even, and specifically like to investors, because a lot of times I'm working with scientists working within universities and they need to find funders for their work. And a lot of times the funders don't really, they're not necessarily science savvy people per se, or they might appreciate science, but they don't know the details of it. But they want to know like the value of what's being worked on and like feel good about what they're helping to fund, right?
Right.
And I always wonder about this too, because I catch a lot of resistance from scientists feeling like, no, like I do the science. That's what I do. That's what I know. Like, don't ask me like this other thing. This is a lot for me.
Yeah.
I'm doing this. On one hand, I have sort of two thoughts about it. On one hand, I'm like, welcome to 2026. You got to learn how to communicate it. But also, that's a lot for them to learn too, to like learn how, like learn the science and communicate it. It's like two different things. And I always wondered like, like, yes, they should, but I wondered like, and there's like such an opportunity too, like the scientists that can learn how to communicate science effectively can become sort of like rock stars in a way, like I think of like the Neil deGrasse Tysons and, one of my personal heroes is Carl Sagan. And there's a lot of other scientists out there too, but also like, maybe it is too much to ask. And like what we need isn't necessarily like scientists being better communicators, but we need more translators.
That's an interesting thought. And I've been thinking about that a lot too. I personally believe that the superpower of a scientist is always going to be communicating that. And the people that are able to do that will rise above. That's what you would hope. But, in a corporate setting, things are also a little bit slower to be adopted.
Yeah.
So is that a job that's going to be created in the next couple of decades now that we're seeing that the public does have a really vested interest in understanding the technology of what you're building? Maybe. Science communicators already exist. That is a job that is out there.
Yeah.
But they tend to do more of journal work. So when it comes to doing academic writing or creating events around in conferences. And so that is still kind of on that peer-to-peer basis. Are we going to expand that outwards into a role that looks like talking to, external facing people on a public scale? Maybe. I think that would be the best case scenario. But again, because of this landscape that you're looking at, where you cannot look like you're promoting or advertising anything that's not approved, it does make it really dicey for companies to do so, which is why I really lean on partnership as the solution here, and creating or sponsoring or partnering authentically with these kind of third-party, nonprofit, or even just outside, I don't know what to call it, but like just outside partners that can really do a lot of that for you, because it is needed. It's definitely necessary. Companies or just the science itself deserves a voice that really drives that impact. The science itself is foundational. You definitely have to have it. But that impact narrative, when you're tying it back to the disease you're solving for and the patient outcomes you're targeting, that's something that can bring everybody together. There's nobody that expects one person or one company to solve the cancer problem or solve the vaccine problem. You have to be able to do this in partnership, working along with advocates, disease coalitions, nonprofits. Everybody has to be contributing to the ecosystem. So that's really going to be something that we would need to lean on in the future to make sure that you're giving it the spotlight and the support and the funding and the innovation it needs to accelerate and de-risk at the same time.
Yeah. So, well, in a sense, like it would be like a third party. I mean, I guess that's a little bit like what I was thinking about with like a translator too. Like, but yeah, a third party out there talking about it. But you're saying like more of like an advocacy organization, so with AIDS and cancer, like these sort of patient advocacy groups already exist, and so you're almost thinking like preceding advocacy groups for different potential therapies that could be developed later on some, maybe?
I think I'm thinking more about creating something that's hybrid. So not necessarily, just talking to academic journals. That's still important. We need to talk in collaboration on a peer-to-peer basis. We need to learn from each other. You also need to teach the public. So whether that is in the CDC, whether that's in the FDA, whether that's in a patient advocacy group, hopefully it'd be amongst all of them. Making yourself available as a drug developer company or a small biotech to them as a partner in the disease and not the is really where you're going to get that benefit. Because you, as the drug developer, you're the expert in the technology. You're also kind of an expert in the disease site itself. That tends to be more medically leaning. But, you're familiar. You've been around the block. You know what you're talking about. Letting your co-partners as, whether it's the FDA, the CDC, a patient advocacy group, a third-party coalition, that you all come together, as multiple corporations are representing. When you're starting to champion the disease and saying, we are working towards eradicating cancer, we're working towards eradicating HIV, we're working towards, utilizing mRNA to drug the undruggable. These are things that people want to hear about, and creating a body that's specifically able to do this and talking to companies, FDA, CDC, without being beholden to any one of those, I think would be absolutely beautiful to do. We've kind of seen individuals do that on, TikTok or on their own podcasts or wherever they find themselves.
They kind of take it on themselves. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they say, this is something I'm passionate about. I understand the limitations on a corporate scale, but I'm a person and well equipped to just educate you on this is kind of a clinical trial that's currently running. I don't know if it's good for you. I'm not giving you medical advice. I'm letting you know that it exists, and I'm breaking it down in a way that you can understand. That is incredibly useful, and it benefits the public, the drug developers, the FDA. It builds trust all around. And so that's part of like bringing people into partnership is what we need to be doing.
Yeah, totally. So I could see a way where this could like backfire a little bit though too, right? Where like the fact that there's people out there talking about these different therapies can...
How do you qualify them?
Yeah.
Is that the question you're getting to?
Well, that, but also like the fact that there's like, the fact that like maybe even drug development companies are even sort of funding the communication beforehand, that itself can be seen as a signal of some sort of conspiracy afoot too, right? And it does create a situation where like we would benefit from, it goes both ways, like as a society having more trust for like the value of drug development, but also like the drug development companies, building the trust with society too, right?
Yeah, it is a question that has been posed before, especially when it comes to these very powerful patient advocacy groups that are really well aligned, really mission focused, and they are getting sponsorships from, a J&J, from a Gilead, from whoever who have products in that space. How do we know that you're not being influenced when you're doing your events and you're doing your educational portions? I think that is the job of the FDA. They're there. They have a whole department when it comes to promotion and advertising to make sure that you're disclosing properly, that you're not promoting anything that hasn't been approved yet, that any promotions that a company does put out is going to be fair and balanced. They have a whole arm that is specifically towards that because we are one of the only 2 countries that allow promotional advertising on pharmaceutical products.
Oh, fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. It's not common. So this is something that you do have to look out for, but part of the way that this works is, again, based on that trust. We understand that there are enough good actors in the space that really do care because, there's nothing, everybody can be affected by cancer. Most people have been. When the pandemic came, it came for all of us. And so there is vested interest because we are all stakeholders in this same public health issue to make sure that whatever we are communicating is going to be stepping stones in a journey that leads to greater public health advantages. So yeah, we're really leaning on the good faith of your fellow peer, your fellow human and saying, we all care about this subject. We want to make sure that the testing is going to be rigorous. We're not saying lower that bar. We're just saying let us in earlier, give us a snapshot of what you can tell us. Yeah, about technological matches on a research basis. And, there's also the room for academics in this space as well. This is a large conversation. Universities are really good about this. Well, not necessarily the level of language that they use, but universities are very good about publishing a lot, being very accessible if you're able to, digest that Google Scholar publication.
That's not necessarily... That's accessible to a certain, subset of people, a small subset of people.
We can go farther and saying, hey, this is an event that we're doing in the public. And I'm explaining it to you on a very base level that's going to be talking about how it affects you personally. I want you to care about clinical trial, Brave or what. I just made that up. It's not a real trial. Or it might be, I don't know. Brave that is targeting pancreatic cancer today. It may be something that, you might see in the next couple of years. Maybe not. No one can actually promise you anything, but we can say, this is going to affect you, and I want you to know that we care.
Yeah. It's just so interesting, too, because it is I'm a person that is generally a proponent of science and medicine and technological advancement. But I also come from a place of healthy skepticism, I like to think, and recognizing that there is a sort of inherent challenge in that these things are going to be driven by money and financing and capitalism and stuff. And that creates some tensions with how, whether things are done for the greater good or done for, the greater return on investment. Right. And recognize sort of how these systems interplay. And it does I guess it's just so complicated too, because I know that there's people out there that will have a skepticism about the doctors are just prescribing this because they're being paid, and on one level, it could be all kinds of issues there too. We're just overworking doctors and they just can't know about everything. But also and then maybe they're not necessarily being directly paid, but the pharmaceutical advocates and lobby and salespeople just have easier access to their ear. And therefore that message will have more play in the doctor's mind than, more broad across the board message, which, isn't necessarily a conspiracy. It's just a sort of flaw in the system, perhaps. I don't know. I'm just kind of I'm not really sure where I'm going with this.
I think what you're grappling with is that there's no clear answer.
Yes.
There's no perfect model. That's true. We are a coalition of people that are doing our best. So there's going to be faults and flaws in the system. That's true. From the conversations I've been having, what I've noticed is that there tends to be more skepticism in how the FDA is in negotiation with the drug development companies rather than what the drug development companies are doing in and of themselves. I think that in itself is a positive signal that most people are like you. They're interested in the technology. They're convinced that the innovations that are coming out are true innovations, that they're either working on expanding access or becoming more precise or becoming more personalized or just becoming better acting drugs. So at least that hurdle is more or less being well managed. The part that people don't quite understand yet is where is the pushback? Where is that conversation happening and what does that look like? Can you catch bad actors? And that is a very large conversation that's not going to be solved anytime soon. I unfortunately don't have any answers for that. I think you have, good situations where we go, again, back to cancer. This is a thing that came from, so Mary Lasker is a person who was really well credited with pushing forward this war on cancer. She was she was a public policy advocate, and she was a lobbyist, and she talked to the president and first ladies and researchers, and she said, I want to make sure that you have all the funding that you could possibly need to take on cancer. So in the positive sense, that works out really, really well. The funding for the NIH exploded when it comes to cancer research. The American Cancer Society was founded based on this. She was incredibly pivotal in making sure that we had any progress at all. On the opposite side, we remember the opioid crisis. That was when bad actors were allowed. It's still going on. Bad actors got a foothold into the right people, and they were able to have a lot of harm when it came to communities. And so everything is going to be balanced out, good and bad. The part that we really want to be able to do is arm against them. So the regulatory body that we have right now is the FDA. They are doing a lot of jobs. They're approving, they're negotiating, they're checking, and they're also reporting and trying to catch these people at the same time. Part of what allows the FDA to do this on such a small scale and multiple arms right now is PDUFA. And so that's the program where when a company wants to apply for market application, they have to pay a fee. That in itself funds the FDA. And so even though it might look like to some people conflict of interest, you're telling me a drug developer is paying money to the FDA and saying, please give me a good reward. It actually works really well. It incentivizes the FDA to move quickly, to really look at what you have and make those decisions. It informs on what a good application looks like because you have a lot of these examples in the past of when it's gone well with the FDA, the meetings that they have with you. And it also allows the FDA to hire the people to do this work. So it actually works really, really well, even though it might look like a conflict of interest at the top. It ends up being because of just really good faith that most people are doing their absolute utmost to hold that safety and efficacy line before it reaches the public.
Okay.
That being said, it's not perfect. There are holes in that.
Totally. Well, that's kind of where I kind of come back to like the scientific literacy, getting people, trying to infuse some understanding of like the challenges and reality of, how science is never going to be perfect into broader societal understanding. And like science is always a sort of it's an iterative process of like discovery, and there's always going to be outliers, there's always going to be flaws. Even like an amazing medication that works miracles is going to have like some crazy side effect for a certain segment of the population. This is just part of the deal, and we sort of have to weigh the pros and cons when it comes to like every type of medication or advancement or anything like that. So, but a lot of times we'll see, people will hear just about like one person that had a terrible experience with like a flu vaccine, and all of a sudden, nobody wants to take it anymore. It's like, no, 99.9% of people, it was fine. That one outlier happened, like that. There's so many outliers in our world. You can, trip over your rug and like die. That's an outlier too, right? So like we're all sort of like managing risk with regards to our health in so many different ways. And I'm just now kind of gotten lost mid-rant there, but yes.
I think if I were to try to pick that up, it is true that there are conversations that need to happen on a public stage, and there are conversations that need to happen in your doctor's office. On that public stage is kind of understanding the frameworks. How does the FDA work with the drug developers? What kind of rigor is being asked of them? What kind of safeguards are in place to make sure that it is working as well as able? And those are conversations that can happen and should be happening publicly. One of the things I like to talk about is that no drug you've ever taken has been 100% pure. 100% purity is not the standard in drug development. It never has been. The standard has always been safety. What does it look like on a population scale? That risk to benefit ratio, is that being properly tuned so that we think that on a massive scale or on a population basis that the benefits are going to outweigh the risks. That being said, for each individual person, it doesn't preclude you from having a bad reaction. I have had vaccines where I had a bad reaction. I was one of those that was personally affected by this. So I understand that. But that is a conversation that you need to be having with your doctor who knows your intimate patient history, where they can kind of guide you a little bit better and say, you can come with questions. You can say, I understand this technology to this degree. What else can you tell me and how it affects me in my life personally? And that's a decision that you guys need to be making together. And nobody's doing this alone in silos. And so that transparency really arms every individual person with the right to kind of make that choice on an informed basis. And that's what we hope to do and get to a point where that is being done more frequently, less on fear and more on information.
Yeah. So let's see, I have two questions that I think are going to like sort of segue together. Because one, I want to kind of hear like just your understanding of, to what degree biotech organizations or like the kind of organizations you work with, the way they are thinking about this and like, trying to be creative and trying to take initiative on these kind of communication challenges. But two, I also want to sort of hear like about what your work specifically too. And I'm wondering if those merge or if they're separate questions.
They're kind of separate.
Okay.
I think that there are thorough lines that go between all of them, but I work in a preclinical phase. So generally it's before a single person has been dosed. At that point, a lot of the safety concerns and risks aren't really well known yet. They're being tested on animal models. They're being estimated, but you don't actually know until you start dosing them in humans. So that is a question that is waiting to be filled in, and you're just kind of doing your best. What you can do at that stage in the work that I do is I make sure that every test that's being run is being connected to those same safety and efficacy questions. So for example, if you're looking at a product and you're saying, okay, I made a batch of this stuff. How do I know that it works? I want you to be able to tell very clearly through each individual test that you run when you're looking at characterization. What does it look like through an instrument? Do you know what a little bit less looks like and a little bit more looks like in terms of safety specifically? So if it's a little bit, let's say, so generally you're looking at 100% would be the ideal, right? 100% full, complete, intact molecule. That's generally not how everything works out. There's fractionation, there's degradation, there's hold times that all have to be considered, which means that the end product that you're looking at is going to be somewhere within a range that you've defined. Let's assume that, let's say like 90% is what you actually end up at. At that stage, it doesn't mean that 10% can absolutely be assumed to be harmful. You have to test it. And you're doing that test specifically to say, is it harmful or is it just non-functional? That's a test that you need to be running, and you need to be tying back in your operational levers at that very early stage. That needs to be in your reports, in your batch records, and the communications you bring to individuals on a peer level. This is also something that your board wants to hear about. They want to know that we make this product on a regular basis. On average, it's 90% pure. We test that the 90% works. We've tested that the extra 10% is non-functional. That's a story that your board is going to be really happy with. That's a story that the regulators are going to want to hear about over time. They want to see this repeated over and over and over again. Now, what that looks like on an individual basis is that by the time it hits market, if you're lucky enough that it actually gets that far, you as a person are going to your doctor and saying, okay, I know that this product is not 100% pure. This is what it's looked like in other people. Based on my family history, what are the chances of it's happening to me? But you're not going in saying vaccines aren't pure, therefore we cannot use them. You're going in saying, armed with information that is incredibly relevant. And you're saying, based on my family history, based on my patterns, what are the chances of it's happening to me? What is my risk to benefit ratio?
It sounds like such a big leap for people that where so many people are just struggling to get healthcare though too, right?
Yeah, it's hard to do. It requires a provider that is invested in you. It assumes that you have access to consistent healthcare where they have that data on you. It assumes that you have a full family history, that you understand your own background really well. And that's kind of a best case scenario. That's kind of what we've got to work with.
No, I know. I mean, I get it. This is imperfections. But so what about with your work, like from benchtops to boardrooms though? Because with regards to that, and then how organizations are thinking about this creatively too. Is that to what degree is that part of that work, or is those?
Yeah. So my portion is at that early stage. Before you can communicate that externally, you have to know what your internal story is. Like I mentioned, you have all these different arms that all have different concerns. If you're at the regulatory stage, you're looking at how you're talking to the FDA. If you're in the business development stage, you're looking at partnerships. If you're in CMC, you're looking at, the technological aspect of it. I'm looking at creating a common language between all of them so that they're all on that same page. And this is somewhat of a competitive currency that companies can really use to distinguish themselves, because that means that everybody who's on your team, whether they're the CEO or they're, a technical operator, they understand the impact of what you're doing, they're mission focused, and they can communicate that to, in conferences, if they're going out and they're, putting on a poster presentation, they understand it on a mission level. When you're talking to your board, they understand the impact of what you're doing. They're really in there as a partner with you, and they're willing to hang on with you for the long haul. Being able to get a scientist to do that, being able to get, a business person to do that and understand that same story takes some effort. And that's the creative leap that I'm taking right now. I'm saying that it is possible, but you have to, first of all, come to a commonality where you're looking at the impact of what you're doing and using that as the language that you're kind of disseminating out and aligning around.
Okay.
And this is something that you need to build over time.
Yeah. And what does that look like when you're working with organizations on that? Like just can you give us like some insight into that process?
Yeah. So what you like to do is that you say, okay, what do you got? First of all, you're always doing discovery. Where are you right now? What is the therapeutic area that you're targeting? What kind of innovation are you working around? How far are you in your progress? What do you believe in as part of your product? And then from there, you start to ask real questions. Who do you hope to be affected by this? Are you targeting rare diseases in general? And then you're looking for advocacy groups and people that are truly affected by those. OTC is one that has a really strong advocacy group. Ornithine trans, it's an enzyme.
Okay. There's some enzyme out there with some advocacies. Got it.
Correct. Or a better one is cystic fibrosis. Okay. Cystic fibrosis has a patient advocacy group that is well known. And that's a rare disease that doesn't affect a lot of people, but those that are affected know their stories really well. Well, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is really good about having sponsorships that create materials around education. So I'm not saying as a company, you're saying, oh, I'm working on product 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to take this to Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and ask them to promote it. That's illegal. But what you can do is say, we are both partners in cystic fibrosis right now, awareness and education. So as we're building this, we want to bring you in as partners, and we want to say, hey, this is a product that this is our technical brief that we have right now that's available. Do you have resources for funding, or do you have resources with or connections with academics that can really help us accelerate our pathways? So you're looking at a technical basis, and you're saying, who else can we bring on to make us go a little bit farther? What can we learn from them as well? And so this ends up in briefs and memos where we can say, this is a product we're working on. This looks like this has happened in the past. We've looked at our advocacy groups here. They have said that they're incredibly excited about this. This is something that we can go and take to either a board member or even throw an event for cystic fibrosis in general and say, like, this is how it impacts other people. There are people that are working on this right now. Just creating that public awareness, having that spotlight brings funding. It helps attract talent that you need. It helps
It's like
really...
when they do the walks for cystic fibrosis. And
Exactly. All of that is incredibly helpful when you're a drug developer in making sure that people care about what you care about, and you're finding the right partners together.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about, like, because when you do the walk, like, a walk, I don't know, is that what they do? A walk for cystic fibrosis? I feel like I've heard that, where, like, people walk and they have pledges and all that stuff, or like.
I think they do, yeah.
Okay.
And that is part of just bringing the community along with it. Like I said, these are rare diseases. So
it gets people to show up.
The FDA tends to respond to where there's need.
Place. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm thinking about you.
No. I'm saying, like, the FDA tends to respond to where there's need. So proving that there's need in that space attracts funding. All of that funding attracts spotlights. All of those spotlights attract negotiation. And so if you have an answer to or you have a solution to a problem, they're willing to work with you on that. So when you do these walks, you're literally just telling people, hey, do you remember that this drug exists? There are families that are being affected by this. There are companies that are trying to become good contributors in this space. And what we want to do is make sure that everybody knows and everybody cares that we're out here and we're doing work. And so that might lead into either good PR for your company, that might lead into more conferences, more coalitions. You're just kind of expanding your network and saying, hey, we're talking the same language here. This language is patients and outcomes. Our language is diseases. These are strategies and tactics we can use to kind of tackle that. And this is what you can look forward to.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I'm thinking of it from, like, the just the aspect of like, all right, like they are physically there in the street doing this walk, like they see each other and everybody is represented. And that just sort of gives like credibility to like, I believe this cystic fibrosis is a thing. This is a problem. And
Yeah, it's the community building portion.
yeah.
And so when people hear about it, maybe even in 5 years later, they're like, I remember when I went to that walk and there was that family who told me, I had a kid who has cystic fibrosis and they shared their story with me. And now I'm hearing that, whatever company is having, a new product on market, that has a positive impact in my mind. That helps.
Interesting. Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, this is probably a good spot to wrap it up here then. So let's see if people are very curious about what you're doing, they want to know more, how can people find you?
Yeah, so I have a couple avenues. My personal LinkedIn is a good way to contact me directly. If you want to look at kind of the products that I have for biotech people, there's a website, Benchtop Boardroom, that I use where I publish a CMC readiness rubric. So if you're in this space itself, you want to know how close are you to having these conversations, what your defensibility is, you can use that. You can also just look at there for articles that kind of like help people navigate this layer. Like I said, it's not really easy to do. And so you do want to go into there with a playbook. And then if you're just a regular public person, I also do talks around where I kind of digest this for you. I have a series called Behind the First Dose where I talked about the COVID vaccine specifically and how that looked like on a negotiating basis. And so that really pushes forward scientific communication on a public standing level that really explains to people, how these things look like.
Cool. And we'll put links to all this stuff in the show notes too, so people can find it there also. So Lola Akapo, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to Lola Akapo for joining me on the podcast and sharing her perspective on science, communication, and the future of biotechnology. My big takeaway is that whether we're talking about medicine, technology, institutions, or each other, it just seems that trust is such a foundational challenge of our time. And as a lot of you know, like building trust is a big part of my work, helping leaders build trust in the people that they are talking to as well. And as Lola points out, this isn't just the kind of thing that you can build through a press release or a marketing campaign. It's really built through relationships and transparency and education and time. Because new ideas, they don't just need to be invented, like they need to be understood and shared through communities and trusted sources. And sometimes the biggest challenge isn't the technology itself. It's like helping people make sense of it. And so I'm curious to hear all y'all's thoughts. What did you think of this conversation? What were some of your takeaways? What parts of that trust dynamic do you feel like might be missing for certain realms in your life or for certain fields out there in the world? And what do you think we could improve? So if you'd like to also learn more about Lola's work, you can check that all out in the show notes. And if you enjoyed the episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with someone who might find it interesting. Those simple actions really do help people discover the show and is very helpful for me and all the guests that I have on too. And so with that, thank you for listening to another episode of Braver New Worlds, and we hope to see you again soon.